Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching a special edition of W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. Our top story today, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman welcomes President Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia as he begins his first major diplomatic trip of his second term. Both the Crown Prince and President Trump signed a strategic economic partnership agreement between their two countries. Shortly after signing the agreement, the two leaders addressed crowds at the Saudi-US Investment Forum in Riyadh. Today, we're bringing you special coverage, US President Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. It's his first major diplomatic trip of his second term. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman welcomed the president earlier today, and just a few hours ago, they signed a strategic partnership agreement between their two countries, covering energy, mining and defense. They then went to the Saudi-US Investment Forum in Riyadh. The Crown Prince addressed the summit first and said, "We hope to continue to build with you, President Trump." Trump then stepped on stage. Here's just some of what he had to say.
It's an honor to be here. What a great place. What a great place, but more importantly, what great people. I want to thank His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, for that incredible introduction. He's an incredible man. Known him a long time now. There's nobody like him. Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much, my friend. With this historic state visit, we celebrate more than 80 years of close partnership between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Ever since President Franklin Roosevelt met with King Salomon's father, King Abdul Aziz, aboard the USS Quincy in 1945, the U.S.-Saudi relationship has been a bedrock of security and prosperity. Today, we reaffirm this important bond, and we take the next steps to make our relationship closer, stronger, and more powerful than ever before. It is more powerful than ever before.
Trump's visit is attracting attention from around the globe, and our website editor, Sara, who's in Riyadh, sent us this report.
Thanks, Leigh-Ann. I'm here in Riyadh, where U.S. President Donald Trump arrived this morning around 9:45 a.m. local time, and he received a very warm royal welcome. He was greeted by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as other officials, including the kingdom's ambassador to the U.S., Princess Rima bint Bandar. Now, this is his first official state visit abroad, where he's spending 2 days in Saudi Arabia, and a trip that he describes as historic. This is the second time Trump has picked Saudi Arabia to be the destination for his first foreign visit during his term. After his arrival, Trump, along with MBS, headed to the Al Yamama Palace for joint talks and introductions between their delegations. And that's when Trump introduced his advisor and Tesla CEO, Elon Musk, to the Crown Prince. The MBS also met with other big names from tech, including OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. And it's important to note that this visit isn't just about politics, but a huge focus is on cooperation, deals, and growing economic and business ties between Saudi Arabia and key U.S. players. The Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum had already kicked off when Trump arrived, and this is where many CEOs and top business leaders, as well as government officials, are meeting to put the final touches on these deals. Key sectors at the forefront of this year's event are energy, sustainability, AI and tech, as well as space and defense. And we're talking about multi-billion-dollar deals here that will be signed during this trip, and they're likely to start taking shape very soon, with others unfolding over the longer term. And we'll have more on this trip and this visit later tonight and tomorrow. Back to you, Leigh-Ann.
Riyadh is playing host to hundreds of international journalists covering President Trump's Middle East visit. Earlier, Al Arabiya editor Michal Prendergast caught up with U.S. affairs researcher Hassan Altarazi, who told them how significant the trip was and what it means for the region.
I believe that the timing is very sensitive and very important for such a state visit in which Trump is facing so many difficult issues in the region for the time being. Let's say about in political arena, there are so many urgent causes need to be addressed at once. So I think the timing is very important. Beside the economical side of this visit, he will be discussing a lot of issues, a lot of projects to come with Saudi Arabia and with the whole region. You know, there will be an American Gulf Summit tomorrow. Sometimes tomorrow to be discussing a lot of phases of cooperation between these two sides, and we are waiting for the results.
And there's obviously a strong relationship between President Trump and the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince has announced they will invest $500 billion. As well, the last time he became president, this was his first state visit. Mm-hmm. The significance of the visit, again, it shows a friendship and a partnership. How is the feeling on the ground in Saudi regarding President Trump?
Well, to be honest, it's very enthusiastic. And the first time Trump came to the region to explore the chances, the difficulties, the challenges. Now he knows more about the region. Saudi knows more about Trump himself, about the new administration in place in Washington. So there is a mutual interest, a mutual understanding for what each one of them needs from the other side. So this will make the issue more easier for both of them and for the region as well.
Of course. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm now joined by former Trump White House staffer and Trump campaign deputy communications director, Caroline Sunshine. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me. So right now, we've just seen Donald Trump addressing a huge crowd in Riyadh. We also heard from the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. What exactly is the significance of the memorandums and agreements that were signed today between the US and Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. Well, from the perspective of the United States, I can tell you it shows the affection and the respect and the importance that President Trump sees in his relationship and in the United States' relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and our partnership and what it means throughout the region. You know, as you have just mentioned, President Trump in both his first term and now his second term has selected Saudi Arabia to be his first foreign state visit. It's hard to understate the significance of that. You know, many of President Trump's predecessors have chosen more traditional Western nations. Their first visit has often been to Canada or to the United Kingdom. President Trump, on both occasions in both of his presidencies, has chosen to mark his first visit to Saudi Arabia, and it is certainly a departure from President Trump's predecessor, President Biden. You may remember President Biden said that his goal was to make the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a pariah. And, you know, you think back to comments like that, and how horrible it was to hear a U.S. president speak that way of such a long-standing, valuable partner and ally to the United States. And so I think it speaks volumes that President Trump has selected this as his first visit. I think it also speaks volumes that His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince himself, was there to greet President Trump on arrival, such a sign of mutual respect and mutual affection. And you heard President Trump on that stage mention the longstanding history between our two countries, between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's a partnership going back 80 years that started under U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and, of course, King Abdulaziz. And so now I think the significance of these agreements that you just mentioned that were just signed today is taking that partnership into a new era. President Trump certainly looks at things through a diplomatic lens, but he is also a deal maker. And I think that is something where he finds mutual common ground with many members of the kingdom. Is he's a deal maker. He's looking certainly for diplomatic interest and diplomatic partnership. but he's also looking at it through the lens of economic partnership and strengthening diplomacy through economic partnerships. And so you saw today the kingdom make a commitment to $600 billion of investment in the United States. I think that's a very smart investment for the kingdom. I think it signals that the kingdom sees the United States under President Trump as a great investment. And we are. You look at what President Trump has done with the U.S. economy in the last 100 days. There's never been a better time in certainly the current era to invest in the United States. It's a smart investment for the kingdom. And then, of course, seeing this historic arms agreement between our two countries. Again, I think showing through commitment that the United States views Saudi Arabia as a valuable military partner in our goal of wanting to see peace in the region of the Middle East. And so it's a historic arms deal between our two countries to provide Saudi Arabia with the best weaponry, the best training, the best arms that the United States can provide. And I think it's such a sign of respect and trust that the United States is making this agreement with Saudi Arabia, our longest standing partner in this region. So it's certainly a golden era that's been ushered in here in the United States. And I think it's a golden era for the relationship between our two countries as well.
Well, I must say, Caroline, yes, Trump did say celebrating 80 years of close partnership with Saudi. We heard that in his speech. He also said the White House is calling it the largest defense sales agreement in history. So a lot of wins for Donald Trump in Riyadh right now. A key focus of this trip is securing significant new investments for the US. We saw the flurry of memorandums being signed, as I said. But right now, how do people in America view Donald Trump's trip to Saudi? Because he is facing some political headwinds due to the tariffs and also economic headwinds back at home.
Well, I think any of those headwinds come from misguided places in certain aspects of the American media apparatus, certain parts of President Trump's political opposition who are really struggling to find their footing. You know, President Trump is enjoying a historic favorability rating here at home in the United States, while maybe certain sectors of the more liberal political parts of the American political apparatus have criticized his tariffs. The consequences of them have actually been very popular here at home. And actually, tariffs are something that the American people voted for, you know, in their selection of President Trump as the current president of the United States. This was something that he campaigned on, and it's something that he has made good on. You even saw, you know, today there have been all of these sort of doomsday projections that President Trump's new trade policies, new tariff policies were somehow going to have an adverse effect on the larger picture of the U.S. economy. But what we've seen is actually the exact opposite. Just today, we saw inflation has come down to 2.3%. This was, you know, all the experts and the prognosticators of the professional, economic, and political class weren't expecting to see a number so low. Also, the jobs reports from the last 2 months, both April and March, exceeded expectations. This was another thing that the expert class was warning, was that the U.S. was going to lose jobs, that unemployment was going to go up as a result of these policies. That's the exact opposite of what we've seen. And of course, we have seen country after country want to come to the table and make deals with the United States to invest. But I think it says a lot that while all of these countries are rushing to the table to come make a deal with President Donald Trump, that President Trump sees it as valuable for him to go to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to make a deal with the kingdom and welcome those billions of dollars of investment. As I said, under President Trump, there's no better time to make smart investments in the United States. The United States is open for business, and I think it's an extremely valuable investment for the kingdom that not only strengthens, you know, the partnership between our countries, but will be a very smart investment long term for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Caroline, how will these agreements that were signed with Saudi Arabia today actually trickle down and help the American people? As President Trump said, there will be short-term pain due to his tariffs, even though you outlined today that some of that economic data that we have seen from the US hasn't been doomsday, as the experts did predict. But how are the American people going to benefit from what we've seen today?
Certainly, in a number of ways, short term and long term. A number of those investments, that $600 billion number is certainly large. But when you break it down, those investments are in places like AI, healthcare, energy, defense. I believe as part of the agreement, there will be a plant opening up in Michigan, right in the heartland of the United States. It's, as President Trump said earlier today in Saudi Arabia, it's an agreement that will likely create millions of jobs here in the United States. And it's not just about the number of jobs it'll create, it's about, the kinds of jobs. For example, in the AI sector, AI is the future. So these are jobs that are going to be, the jobs of the future, jobs that will remain in the United States long term. And I think it just also marks such an inflection point from President Trump's, predecessors, really, actually. And now President Trump being back in office for his second term, to see this level of investment in the United States. Historically, it's sort of been the opposite. The United States has really been a larger consumer than we have been producer. It has often been the United States that has looked to make investments outside of its shores. And so to have such a significant sized investment, $600 billion from one of our, long-standing partners with a thriving economy of its own, is certainly going to have trickle-down effects for the American people. And it's exactly what the American people voted for. They wanted a president like President Trump who could make smart deals on their behalf, a businessman who understood the economy, somebody with instincts. The American, largely how the American people see its own expert and political class for the last 20 years has been people who haven't had correct instincts, whose instincts have really been incorrect on many things, namely trade. And so they wanted to elect a leader like President Trump, whose instincts may go against the experts and those who think they know best. But as we've already seen, as I pointed out with that inflation number and the last two jobs reports, President Trump's instincts have been correct. And I think it's just further evidence for why this investment and this partnership will pay dividends for generations for both of our nations.
And I just want to talk on the political front, because in the Middle East right now, there is instability, and Donald Trump is not visiting Israel during this trip, Caroline. Some critics are accusing him of snubbing the country. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, I would say those critics are probably the same ones that thought that, the jobs numbers weren't going to be great and the inflation number wasn't going to be low. These critics don't know much. And that's why they're not in the White House. President Trump wants to see peace. And I know that's something that, as I mentioned, he looks at things through an economic lens, and the economic lens then aids diplomatic lens. But I know that's something that why he places such faith in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a great long-standing partner in the region, because peace is of mutual interest here. And President Trump is interested in making deals and interested in strengthening alliances with partners that he believes are sincere in their desire for peace. And so I won't get ahead of the president and anything that, he has to say later on in his remarks, but the president's goal is peace. And I would caution that any of his critics and any of his detractors may not want that same goal. But President Trump is the only American president in the modern era to not start a new war. And during his short time in the political arena, going back to 2015 and then now to his recent election in his second term as president, he has been very consistent in his position that he believes that he wants to see peace throughout the world, whether that be the Middle East, whether that be between Russia and Ukraine. He is interested in pursuing peace and strengthening alliances with those that he believes are sincere and share that belief and are prepared to meet that goal with him and be partners in that goal.
Do you think Donald Trump will go to Turkey on Thursday to meet with Zelensky and Putin if he does actually pitch up to have these talks?
You know, if there's one thing I learned working for President Trump myself, it's that anything can happen. So I won't get ahead of the president, but the president's a very open-minded man. He's a very flexible deal maker. And if he feels the conditions are right, if he feels that there are sincere efforts on the side of those asking meeting, he just may surprise everybody and do it. So I would say stay tuned. You just never know.
Caroline, I don't know, I must admit. But how important is it actually for the White House and Saudi Arabia to build economic and political links at a time when we are seeing instability across the Middle East? I think this is a big question in the region. Can Donald Trump and the US really help broker ceasefire deals and bring some more stability and peace to certain regions? Like we're seeing headlines about Syria. Donald Trump said he could meet the new Syrian leader, and there seems to be a movement. What do you think, Caroline?
Well, as I said, I know that President Trump's goal and his position is he wants to see peace, specifically in the region of the Middle East. And that's, as I said, a little bit of a departure from some of his predecessors, where I'm not sure that goal has been as clarified or steadfast, but President Trump is committed to wanting peace. And I think what you see, as I mentioned, he looks for partners who he believes are sincere in their belief for peace as well. And he looks to strengthen those partnerships. So I don't think it's an accident or unintentional that President Trump has selected the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be, as I mentioned, his first foreign visit, and also the significance of these deals. President Trump would not be making a historic military arms agreement with anybody if he didn't believe that they shared an interest with the United States of wanting to use those weapons and wanting to use that military partnership for the end goal of peace. And as I said, I think in President Trump's eyes, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a track record of being a long-standing partner going back 80 years to our country, specifically in the Middle East, understanding the goals of the United States. You can't say that for every nation in the Middle East. And so I think this is the timing, as you mentioned, in terms of the size of this agreement and the strength of the commitment, I think absolutely signals to the rest of the region that the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are serious in their commitments and their efforts to wanting to secure peace, and that the partnership between these nations, who are of such significant influence, size, economic scope, military might, is something that the rest of the region might want to take notice of.
And Caroline, I can't let you go without asking you why Donald Trump loves Saudi Arabia and why Saudi Arabia loves Donald Trump. He just looked so comfortable today as he was in the lavish atmosphere. He seems to really enjoy being in the kingdom.
Yes, and he mentioned that, he has now known His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, for some time, that he's known him for a while. And I thought there was that comment almost to me sounded as if he was honored to be in his presence, but also proud. There's a strong personal relationship there, I believe, and I believe President Trump has an eye for great leaders, and he has great respect for great leadership. And I think he's very proud to see how the Crown Prince has ascended and how he has how he's leading his own country. As I said, President Trump mentioned on stage, there's a long-standing partnership between our two countries that goes back 80 years. But certainly President Trump's relationships geopolitically are also predicated on personal esteem and personal chemistry. And you heard him say on the stage, he just loves this region. He loves the people of the region. I think he really respects the tremendous business leaders that are a part of this region that make the kingdom what it is. I think he really respects their intellect, their shrewdness, their ability to be so smart in their deals. As I said, President Trump is a deal maker in chief. This is a man who spent, decades at the top of American business before ever becoming president of the United States. And so that's very much still with him in terms of who he is as a person and as a leader. And I think President Trump, rightfully so, really respects the partnership that the kingdom has showed to our country. President Trump is a patriot. He loves the United States. You saw in the beginning of that speech, they played God Bless the USA. And I think President Trump really appreciates members of the kingdom that feel the same way about our country, that are excited to do business with us, that are excited to honor American values and want to strengthen that relationship. He really welcomes that and has a very warm feeling towards that. So as I said, it's certainly special. It's his American predecessors, President Trump's, whether that be President Barack Obama, President Bush, Clinton, go all the way back. Most of them choose to do their first foreign trip in the UK or Canada or France, and a stereotypical Western nation. So it is a huge departure for President Trump in both his first and second term to select the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at his first visit. And I think it just speaks to the warm personal chemistry and affection that he feels for Saudi Arabia and for its people.
Caroline Sunshine, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Arabiya has been on the ground in Riyadh speaking to experts on journalists covering the US president's trip. Earlier, Arabiya editor Michal Prendergast spoke to Camelia, Entekhabifard, editor-in-chief of the independent Persian, who told them what we could expect from President Trump's visit.
I believe that trip would have an unbelievable and unexceptional impact, not only on economy and investment in the region, also political developments, and politically affects not only in the region, also between United States and Iran, between United States and its Western allies. And that would be very significant since it is the first trip of President Trump since become the president. Of course, if we not includes the funeral of the Pope Francis, but this is extremely important and significant. What we can expect for tomorrow, as you said, that would be enormous investment agreements, and also plan to have an agreement on the investment, the $1 billion of investment between the Saudi companies and the American enterprises, and the goal of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which is having for 2030, we can have this. We can see that has been outlined in a way which it has not only investment from the Saudis, also for the American partners, to stability, security, and development that trip would promise us as the regional residents and also as a global citizen.
Yes, and as you said, it's very symbolic. There is a lot of excitement here on the ground, but there's also been a lot of excitement in America. As you said, the investment, the Crown Prince announced up to $500 billion invested in the American economy. That only isn't big for Saudi, but it's for the whole world, or the global economy. How excited are you for the investment opportunities?
I believe I am also American, and the opportunities for the Americans is beyond our expectation. But it's interesting to outline that to you, how the picture of Saudi Arabia has been changed in the United States. People were not familiar of knowing what's going on here, the development of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This is the second trip of President Trump. that is telling us how much important is this country for Americans. And his first political foreign trip also, again, to Saudi Arabia, which it pictured to Americans, Saudi is not only an important ally for the Americans, which the history goes beyond than 80 years of the relationship, but economical wise, political wise, tourism wise, Saudi Arabia is very, very important to them. I am seeing now there are an interest in American tourism demands to travel to Saudi Arabia. When they can see President here, they can see this picture of us speaking on camera, they can see the city, they would elaborate them. There is a different era and ages in Saudi, which is not about oil and money. It's about investment, about tourism, and safe places which they can come and visit.
That was our editor there, Michal Prendergast. But now we know after the interview that he did, we heard from the Saudi Crown Prince, who did give a speech in Riyadh. He said, today we hope for investment opportunities worth $600 billion, including deals worth $300 billion that were signed during this forum. So those are the latest details that we're getting from the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We can now go to Istanbul to speak to Matthew Brazier, a retired US ambassador. Matthew, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me. The US and Saudi have signed a letter of intent for future defense capabilities. How significant is this?
Yeah, I'm really honored to be with you on this amazing day in US-Saudi relations. So, I haven't seen the text of it yet, but we know that for a long time, the United States and the government of Saudi Arabia have been discussing possible military alliance with a security guarantee akin to what the U.S. provides under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty to its European allies and Canadian ally, which is an attack on one, or in this case, either, is an attack on all. I think the agreement is going to end up not going quite that far, but is still going to be a sign of the U.S.'s commitment to Saudi Arabia's sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and a strategic partnership. And also, of course, as you were just discussing, or your guests were discussing, there's also this memorandum of understanding, but also the deals for the purchase of U.S. military equipment. There have been a number of figures thrown out there, 300 billion, 600 billion, but a lot of military equipment. And so, we should keep in mind that the Trump administration, or this Trump administration, I should say, is conducting diplomacy in a revolutionary way for the United States, which is letting business and letting trade agreements drive the foreign policy, both the strategy and the implementation. So I think we need to look at both the memorandum of understanding on security as well as on energy and the overall set of commercial agreements and investment agreements being signed to show that there is a qualitatively new strategic partnership between Saudi Arabia and the United States that's being launched right now.
It's interesting, Matthew, that you just spoke to me there about that, because obviously in the last couple of hours, Donald Trump has signed a strategic economic partnership with the Saudi Crown Prince, but it includes multiple agreements, and the devil is always in the detail. Do you think we'll get more details about these memorandums that were signed and about how this is going to benefit both Saudi and the US?
Oh, of course we will. I mean, rightfully, both national leaders and their teams are proud of these agreements. And of course, they will be publicized, and that the security guarantee I was talking about will need to be publicized to a certain extent, or else it loses its deterrent value on any foes that may want to do harm to either Saudi Arabia or the United States. So yeah, it'll be publicized. And I think another key point to remember is how qualitatively these agreements suggest a transformed Saudi-U.S. relationship. Many of your guests have talked about, and His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman showed President Trump the photo of President Harry Truman and Abdulaziz bin Saud on the USS Quincy, I guess it was back in 1945. What that was showing is that the original strategic partnership between the countries was, of course, fossil fuels, really oil back then, from the Saudi side, and U.S. Military security, some sort of umbrella and other security cooperation on technology. But what we are hearing today is a whole new realm of technology, of AI investments, and of other digital technologies with the CEO, well, the CEO we saw him of Starlink and of X is there, Elon Musk, but so is the CEO or the head of ChatGPT. So are many CEOs, Amazon. So these agreements underscore the transformation of Saudi Arabia's economy under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman. Now Saudi Arabia is emerging as a regional power that is diversifying its economy and is committed to being a huge actor in the next industrial revolution in the field of AI. That sort of cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the United States has never happened before, and it is the future, and now it is the present.
So let's talk a little bit about AI. And we saw Donald Trump, you mentioned that, Sam Altman, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, and Mohammed bin Salman. Matthew, they were all shaking hands in Riyadh. They greeted each other. It was an extremely warm exchange. As I said, these are the most powerful businessmen, arguably, in the world. How will this be viewed by global business leaders? What will the take on this be?
I think it's a signal to global business leaders that Saudi Arabia has arrived. It is a player on the global stage. I mentioned before it's a regional power, but it's much more. I mean, it's trying to help the peace process. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and we all know the meetings were held in Riyadh recently. But beyond that, it's not. Saudi Arabia is not simply a source of investment money. As the cliche goes, it's not an ATM. It is an actor. It is an actor that is shaping global investment on this most advanced area of technology, and is leading the way with the modernization and transformation of its own economy. So, Saudi Arabia is leading by example. And by the way, so is UAE, and President Trump will be talking about that in his next stop, and he alluded to that also. But the sheer magnitude of the investments that Saudi Arabia can make, and the way it's choosing to do so in these highest levels of technologies, again, is a signal to the world that Saudi Arabia has become a different type of partner. It's not simply about oil, and it's not simply about security, but it is about the most important cutting-edge technologies for the global future.
And let's just talk a little bit about geopolitics at the moment. We obviously know Donald Trump is, of course, in the Middle East. There is instability across the region at the moment. And I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on Donald Trump and the Abraham Accords. He did mention them. He said Saudi will join it when they're ready. But what is your feeling when it comes to Donald Trump and trying to find peace in the region?
Well, yeah, as the previous guest, Ms. Sunshine, perfectly named, by the way, surname, was saying, President Trump thinks of himself as a peacemaker. And this was a central theme of his second inaugural address on January 20th. And for better or for worse, recall that when Saudi Arabia's oil processing facility was attacked in 2019, the world expected President Trump to react militarily. I did. I was on TV programs saying I expected he would feel compelled to respond militarily. And he didn't. And he didn't because he wanted to send a message, I think, to the world that it's time to get beyond using military force to resolve disputes, and instead let's use business, or the model of business and negotiation, and the search for shared interests as the way of restructuring international relations. So I think that's what this trip is largely about. In fact, it's the unveiling of a new way to conduct diplomacy. Sometimes the approach is very tough, as when on so-called Liberation Day, April 2nd, President Trump slapped tariffs on everybody around the world, including the U.S.'s closest friends and allies, and massive ones on China. But then, as we saw just yesterday, there's a breakthrough in negotiations with China. So President Trump uses force in the diplomatic and negotiating realm, which preferably to using force in the military realm. And that's a refreshing new approach, and I pray it's going to succeed, but it's unconventional.
Matthew Brazier, there's one thing I can say about Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. It is unconventional, but appears to be working, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, retired US Ambassador Matthew Brazier there. Great to have you on the show. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. Now, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and President Trump have spoken at the US-Saudi Investment Forum. The Crown Prince has announced Saudi Arabia has signed deals with the US worth $300 billion. For more on this, I'm joined from London by Arabiya senior correspondent and presenter Karina Kamel. Karina, what a day to have you on the show. So glad you could join me. Let's start off. There's been a lot of news today, but tech and AI are seen as key growth drivers, both in Saudi and the US. We've seen, of course, Elon Musk speaking during the US-Saudi Investment Forum today. Has it been anything agreed on that front in particular?
Absolutely, and what a remarkable day in Riyadh. The eyes of the world were indeed on the events that we have witnessed today in Saudi Arabia and this giant strategic economic partnership agreement, all encompassing really many different sectors, but absolutely and undoubtedly the tech sector and AI is absolutely front and center in what has been announced today. And in order to understand a lot of the agreements that have been reached today, we also have to point out to our viewers that Saudi Arabia announced yesterday the creation of a new company called Humane that will be under the auspices of Saudi Arabia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Public Investment Fund, or PIF, which will run this company Humane, which will essentially be a linchpin of Saudi Arabia's national artificial intelligence strategy. It's going to build an AI ecosystem, data centers, large language models operating in Arabic, cloud computing, everything you need for Saudi Arabia to achieve its ambition of becoming a global hub outside of the US for AI technology. So a lot of the deals that we've heard today are with some of the AI giants from the United States, like NVIDIA, for example. The CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, today announcing that it has entered a partnership with Humane, this newly created company, for the deployment of 500 megawatts of energy. Data centers are essential to the functioning of AI, but data centers require a vast amount of energy. And Jensen Huang was saying that energy is something that Saudi Arabia has in abundance. And how NVIDIA will help is that it's going to supply semiconductors to Humane in order to generate and to unlock that capacity in order to create those data centers and to set up that AI infrastructure. So that's a partnership with NVIDIA, giving Humane these semiconductors. We also have a partnership or an agreement reached with AMD, another major US tech company. $10 billion will be invested between Humane and AMD in order to develop AI infrastructure also in the kingdom, again, to create these data centers and the general infrastructure that you need to become a leader in this sector. We had some comments saying that this is a milestone deal. So we're really talking about kind of the beginning of a new era, a new focus within the Vision 2030 that Saudi has been following for many years to diversify its economy. We're really seeing AI come to the absolute forefront of this vision. We also heard today from the CEO of Uber, who said that by the end of this year, we will see autonomous vehicles driving on the streets of Riyadh. So that is absolutely something to look out for. We also had some Saudi investments in the United States. So it's both ways. A company by the name of Saudi Data Vault is investing $20 billion in U.S. data centers. And we also had some overall investments from a number. I mean, this is just really kind of a highlight of what we had today. But companies like Google, Oracle, Salesforce, and AMD, as well as Uber, have jointly pledged to invest about $80 billion in both countries in order to develop the AI sector. So it's very much front and center in today's conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, Karina. But let's go back, actually, to this agreement. What were some of the outstanding agreements announced so far? We did see that flurry of memorandums being signed by Donald Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
So absolutely, many sectors involved. In addition to technology, we have defense, we've got the energy sector, we've got mining. So just to give you some examples of some of the big deals that we've been following today, we heard earlier from the CEO of Saudi Aramco, Amin al-Nasser, who talked about adding more investment to one of its largest refineries in the United States in Texas, $3.4 billion to expand a refinery there. This is specifically an LNG or liquefied natural gas. The U.S. obviously a big exporter of gas, and Saudi Aramco having large infrastructure there, so adding investment there. There's an MOU as well with a company called Next Decade and Sempra to supply 6.2 tons of LNG to Aramco. We have gas turbine deals. We've got deals in the healthcare sector. We've got a number of defense deals with the national security companies, Life Shield and Colts. It's a very, very long list of deals, or agreements rather, encompassing a range of sectors to reach that very large number of $600 billion US dollars. But we're also told that this is just the beginning, because this is an economic partnership agreement that really creates a framework for further investment in the future, not just what's been announced today.
Karina, I was speaking to Caroline Sunshine earlier, and she was actually talking to me about the health of the US economy. We did get some data in, and she was saying Donald Trump's tariffs haven't been the doomsday that everyone was expecting. And what I wanted to ask you really is, in light of the tariffs, is this big memorandum that's been signed with Saudi today, is it sending a signal back to the US that Donald Trump is putting America first, that the economy is worth investing in and is open for business?
Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing as well, with the first 100 days being past us now, we're perhaps entering a new phase of the Trump presidency. He's begun his first trip, and let's not remember, this is a historic day because this is Donald Trump's first foreign trip. He's chosen to visit Saudi Arabia, as he did in his first term, and we can't really underestimate the significance of that. And Donald Trump sees the economic relationship and the strategic relationship and the political relationship as fully connected. And he finds a way of connecting all three for the benefit of the US and for the benefit of Saudi Arabia. And everything that's been announced today is a win-win for both sides. So as far as the US economy is concerned, to answer your question directly, absolutely, because Donald Trump promised in his campaign that he would increase investments into the United States. By the way, Saudi investments already today in the United States are about $770 billion US dollars. So large investments already from Saudi to the US, but obviously the goal is to have more investment. And as far as the US is concerned, there's about 600 companies today who have operations in Saudi Arabia, and the goal obviously is to increase those operations and to increase the companies that have a presence there, and it is happening. So in terms of the U.S. economy, absolutely, he's fulfilling that promise. And the benefit for the U.S. economy will obviously be seen, because if the U.S. is signing a deal with China or engaging in talks on trade with other countries around the world, the benefit will be to have a diversified relationship with many different countries around the world. And obviously, Saudi being such a key player in so many different industries, it's very important. And clearly, the message from the Trump administration is we want to build a solid economic, strategic, and political relationship with this really important partner, because we know that that ultimately will be good for the U.S. economy. And absolutely, the data today was headed in the right direction. Inflation was actually lower than expected. So it's very good news for the Trump administration to be able to say the tariffs have yet to impact inflation in the negative way that a lot of people were saying. And I just want to say one final thing, which is that today's major achievements for both sides come on the back of the, shall we say, détente between the U.S. and China. The trade talks that took place over the weekend were a huge step forward. The trade deal with the United Kingdom we chatted about last week. So I think there's been a lot of wins for the Trump administration in the past few days and weeks. And maybe we're seeing a new phase of this administration as it goes forward.
Yes, indeed. Karina Kamel, Al-Arabiya senior correspondent and presenter. What a historic day to join me on the show. I really appreciate it very much, all your insights there. Thank you. President Trump's visit has brought hundreds of journalists and experts to Riyadh as they comment on the US leader's trip. Earlier, Al-Arabiya editor Michal Prendergast caught up with director of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, Dr. Abdel Moen Sayed Ali, who thinks today is a real turning point between Saudi and the US.
I will say if we wait a little bit, it might be a turning point in terms of a number of things, more than being just to be noted as significant because it's coming in difficult times in the region. It has first that's kind of public appreciation of what's happening in the Gulf. And what I will say actually in what we call it the reformist or the moderate Arab states, that they are interested in modernization, interested in building and development and trying to get into the AI like the one we will do with the United States and in modern world. And however, I will say, that to get that message, it is now. You have a focus with the American president who is highly controversial, and yet he was up in a kind of provocative way of dealing with foreign policy. And lately, he is almost now, even internally and externally, he is really getting into it, getting into how the world, how much the world has changed since he has his first term. So therefore, it is really could be a turning point because look, in Gaza we will have a little bit of calm now. More trucks will get to the people there. That is only one problem, but you have the problem with Iran, the problem with the Houthis and the others, and all that is changing. So we are in a moment of changing a course in I will say, a situation that was highly dim, just a few weeks ago.
And to even touch on one of your points you said on like the modernization, even this event in my mind, it seems already a part of Vision 2030. Everything in this region, everything in Saudi, it's building towards that one goal. What's your opinion on Vision 2030?
It's excellent, and I talked and I wrote about it since 2015, which was first initiated. I will say it's a mood. I mean, Egypt has it 2030, Jordan has it, other countries might have 35 or 40, like Oman and others. So it's a mood that was initiated by a new generation of leadership. One of them is Mr. Mohammed, His Excellency Mohammed bin Salman. And these people really look at the stability in the region. Actually, the call was if you have peace with Israel, you get stability. Actually, so far, what we have, no stability in the region. It needs much more power, which only comes from the United States now, in order to help trying to get the issue, not only that Israel have a problem, but because the entire region is really fomenting a lot of radicalism because of the situation in Palestine and a relationship with Israel. So here, who got the guts?
Yes, of course, and he speaks to Saudi's role as a peacemaker.
Saudi always a peacemaker. Saudi made a peace with Iran lately, and Saudi Arabia was behind all mediation efforts in the Middle East. But now to turn the table completely, it needs the United States because it's the only power that really can, A, has an influence over Israel. B, I will say it also have the resources to put all the pieces in the right place of the chess in a peaceful way. Look at what he's talking about Iran. He's taking Iran, we will make a deal, and once the deal, Iran will like to have it merge into the world economy. That means raising sanctions. Look at the issue with the Houthis. The whole thing was redefined. You guys, you don't hit American ships, then we can have a ceasefire. And that's become a model to talk about it in other spots of hotness in the region. So it is here the weight of the United States is something really is important, very important.
We can now talk to Adolfo Franco, Republican strategist and former advisor to Senator John McCain. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. You have previously, good afternoon. You have previously said Trump was looking to sign mega deals with Saudi Arabia and Gulf states. What do you make of the flurry of memorandums of understanding signed today by Donald Trump and Mohammed bin Salman?
Well, I think they're historic. I don't want to repeat what all of the great guests you've had here today, but they're absolutely historic. They're actually quite larger than many of us anticipated. Keep in mind that these are, as the other guests have indicated, investments that are being taken place largely by the private sector. We haven't spoken very much about the yet to be announced military deals, and that is what Saudi Arabia will likely acquire from the United States will be significant in the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. So in terms of the economic and ties, formal ties between the United States in terms of military assistance, this is quite significant. I would say this for this reason to your viewers. What a stark contrast with the previous administration when former President Biden referred to Saudi Arabia as a pariah state. And the strong criticisms, there was even controversy when President Biden met the Crown Prince, whether they would shake hands. So that is a stark difference here from a foreign policy as well as commercial interest of our country from the previous administrations. And I hope that's not lost on the viewers. It's not lost on the American people. Saudi Arabia is the anchor for our relationship in the Middle East. And that was reflected by first being the first stop. We have yet to see two other significant stops, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates is very much like Saudi Arabia in terms of its relationship with the United States, both commercially and in terms of security arrangements. But Qatar is important because it also reflects where there have been sharp differences in the past, the willingness of the United States to highlight a visit there and to strengthen ties and hopefully set a better relationship with Qatar in the future. So you have a dual purpose here, diplomatic, foreign policy, and of course, commercial. And they're all been extremely successful.
But the agreements do cut both ways. How will Saudi Arabia benefit from these agreements with the US? We mustn't forget that, right? That's an important point to make.
Well, I think the benefit for Saudi Arabia is enormous for two reasons. I was in the Middle East just a couple of years ago at the Arab Trade Mart, and I saw the opening that Saudi Arabia wants to do in terms of its diversification and investment. And it is mind-boggling what the plans are for, frankly, tourism and things we haven't even talked about, and other significant investment in the country. The rapid modernization of the country under its current leadership is, of course, unprecedented. So having U.S. investment and the latest investments from particularly what's been discussed, AI, innovative companies, cutting edge, and ultimately what Saudi Arabia is looking for is to replace energy at some point, decades away, of course, but it's the long-term plan. So it can benefit enormously from investment from the United States and the United States as well from Saudi Arabia. The other is the security component. This is great that we're having this wonderful discussion, but it is a dangerous neighborhood. We still have Iran to contend with, which has created a lot of mischief in the region, to say the least. The situation in Yemen, for the time being, appears to be more on the path of stability in terms of its curtailing its piracy on the high seas, and it's, of course, its attacks on Saudi Arabia. So it remains a dangerous neighborhood, and Saudi Arabia will benefit greatly from a phrase the president used in his speech today, which was, the United States will always defend its interests and those of its allies. And there was a wild applause to this, and that is what's been referred to by Michael and others. I think this is the beginning of a more formal alliance with Saudi Arabia in terms of the military and protection of the United States in a more formal way than we have seen in the past. This is the beginning, and I believe that is exactly what the United States will pursue. Almost NATO-like relationship, particularly with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that an attack on Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates is an attack on the United States. I think that was ultimately will come out of this administration in the next 2 or 3 years.
Adolfo, I wanted to speak to you actually, and you just touched on it there, about the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. Trump actually did speak a lot on this, and some of the headlines coming out now after the economic headlines really focus around what Donald Trump is saying. He said he's announced that he's removing sanctions from Syria. He also said he wanted to strike a deal with Iran, and he said that he hopes Saudi Arabia would one day join the Abraham Accords. So it seems that the US and Saudi Arabia are taking steps to achieve stability in the region, if it's diplomatic and politically.
Well, yes, I completely agree with that. That is, of course, in all of our interests, but especially Saudi Arabia's interest, since it neighbors, frankly, it doesn't neighbor, but it's just across the Gulf, Iran, and the threat of Iran to the region. We all know, of course, that the ability of the Houthis in Yemen to conduct the war conducted is with Iranian help. And of course, we know what the situation is in Lebanon and Gaza with respect to Iran's involvement. So therefore, if those things can be negotiated, that is in Saudi Arabia's interest. And of course, the United States wishes that result as well. But there's an important factor here, and the president also mentioned it when he mentioned about unprecedented U.S. military spending. I know the other guests have talked about the peace efforts and so forth, and that's true. Look what's happened with Yemen, and of course, direct talks now with Iran and Oman, and even with Hamas. So President Trump, being the deal maker, wants this deal, but he will not hesitate to use U.S. military force if needed. And I think that is an important message that was sent and embraced by Saudi Arabia and our allies, which is it isn't some foolish errand that we're running of trying to get an agreement with, frankly, historically hostile countries, particularly Iran, but one where we can have verification on two fronts: Iran's commitment to peace, and of course, the issue which is more broadly of concern, the refinement of uranium and its nuclear capability. If those things can be verified, as President Reagan famously said, then I think we're on the right path. If not, the message is also clear about the United States preparing to defend its allies militarily and itself. And this is different than the Biden administration, which was one, frankly, of appeasement.
Adolfo Franco, a Republican strategist and former advisor to Senator John McCain. I really hope we have you back on the show again. I really appreciated your insights and your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been an incredible day in Riyadh. Website editor of Arabiya English, Sara, looks ahead to what we can expect from the rest of President Trump's visit to the Middle East.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Tomorrow, U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to attend a Gulf-U.S. summit where Saudi, American, and Gulf leaders will meet to discuss several key regional matters. And this will be the fifth summit bringing together U.S. and Gulf officials. It also marks the final event on Trump's schedule during his visit to Saudi Arabia, after which he's set to travel to Qatar and the UAE before returning to the United States. Now, it's worth noting that this anticipated U.S. Gulf summit comes at a time of major shifts in the region, especially with the Israeli war on Gaza ongoing and the ongoing U.S.-Iranian nuclear talks, which are unfolding against the backdrop of the decline of the so-called axis of resistance and reported behind-the-scenes tensions between the Trump administration and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump is reportedly expected to share his vision for U.S. involvement in the Middle East and lay out policy objectives for the region. And we'll definitely have more on the summit tomorrow after U.S. and Gulf leaders meet. Back to you, Leigh-Ann.
That was website editor of Arabiya English, Sara, there in Riyadh for us. And that's all from us on a special edition of W News Extra covering President Donald Trump's diplomatic visit to Saudi Arabia. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye, and thank you for joining us for this special edition.